The day after my grandmother's funeral, my mother drove to my flat and hauled upstairs a sizable and dusty leather trunk. "'Tis your grandmother's only inheritance, I'm afraid," my mother said. "'Twas handed to her from your great-aunt Myrtle." I opened the trunk. A collection of porcelain dolls. They were what you would expect from the finest in late 19th century craftsmanship, but with an extra dose of care to anatomic perfection that made them, frankly, eerie. Those realistic faces that seemed to blush under your sight. Those ceramic fingers that appeared to grab your hand and never let it go. Those ice blue glass eyes that looked as if they were staring at something behind your back. Each of the dolls came from a different part of the world and wore an attire from its origin. Each of the dolls came from a different part of the world and wore an attire from its origin. Another in a conga dress, that one under a burqa. Aside from their tiny clothes, all of them looked somehow similar. "They look like your great-aunt Myrtle," my mother said. Myrtle was quite the family black sheep," Mom said later in front of a cup of tea, after I coaxed her into telling me more about my aunt. "That's the reason why you haven't heard about her. She loved these dolls but didn't have any children of her own to play with them, so she left them all to Nana." A heartwarming scene of my aunt playing with an infant version of Nana was popped violently by my mom. Aunt Myrtle hated children. She had no patience in her heart. "Children should be seen, not heard," she used to say. When we visited, she forced us to sit in a corner for hours, staring in silence at an old stereoscope with 2 photographs of the pyramids and the Sphinx. "Oh, we were terrified of her," Mom said with a gulp of tea, and said nothing more about Myrtle that night. It took me several months of research to learn a bit more. Family scrapbooks and old newspapers from the library piled upon my desk under the shelf where I lined all of the uncanny-looking dolls. Aunt Myrtle's life was a puzzle, and at the same time, an emblem of Victorian-era womanhood. Since a young age, she brushed aside ideas of marriage and bearing children, and instead focused on her real passion, Egyptology. She read every book on the matter and went out of her way to meet explorers and museum curators that brought and unpacked the latest discoveries from Luxor and Karnak. Coming from a well-to-do family, Aunt Myrtle traveled twice to Cairo to investigate the culture and ancient history on her own. She was specifically attracted to the art of mummification. She wrote with loving hand list after list of the materials and procedures to preserve the human body through the afterlife. And of course, society frowned upon her. A woman at the time was not expected to be immersed in such deathly matters, but instead to give life to a bouquet of rosy children. Family and friends kept pestering Myrtle about marriage and bearing the family's next generation, but Myrtle declined politely every single time. The pressure kept mounting, and my great-aunt went from courteous dismissing to firm and rebuffing, and from rude refusing to cynical dissent, followed by plain, angry rejection. At the end, she caved. Bitter and frustrated with a world that would not allow her to follow her intellectual interests, Myrtle married the first man who proposed to her, a veritable mistake since her husband turned out to be a violent alcoholic who started to beat her when she couldn't give him a bouncy little heir. Aunt Myrtle endured this hell like many women of the era, in silence and praying at night about "till death do us part." One night, the Lord heard her pleas, since her husband passed away in his sleep at a rather young age and for no apparent reason. 'Twas about that time that Myrtle's obsession of collecting dolls started, but that would not be the last of her eccentricities, nor the more scandalous. Aunt Myrtle started to sleep around, getting each night in bed with a different fellow, and most shockingly at the time, with men of different nationalities. One night she could be seen kissing a gentleman from Asia, then the next, a fellow from South Africa, then a man from the Middle East, or a bloke from Central America. It was as if my aunt was gathering different male features, just like the dolls she loved to collect. However, as much as I looked, Aunt Myrtle left no information about where or how did she acquire her dolls. Instead, she wrote note after note about ancient Egypt and the science of mummification, the implements, the techniques, the craft, and every little nuance. At that moment, I lifted my eyes towards the dolls and caught their lifeless sights, staring blankly at my own eyes with their glassy, lifeless spark. I gazed at their faces, my aunt's features on each and every one, as well as the features of people from China, from Morocco, from Ethiopia. I stood to touch their porcelain skin, cold and lifeless, but holding the imperfections that only a human could have. I recalled, children should be seen and not heard. And my hand started to shake. Could it be? I rushed to the kitchen, looked under the sink, grabbed a hammer, ran to my desk again. I lifted the hammer and aimed at the head of one of the dolls. I stopped right there. I wasn't ready for that. I was not prepared to crack that ceramic shell and discover under it the mummified body of a tiny aunt or uncle. I could not stand the nightmare of staring into the empty eye sockets of a child killed by my deranged ancestor and prepared for eternal life as an act of demented love. I dropped the hammer, but right there I realized that I could not live for another second with this partial knowledge. I could not stay in the same flat with these dolls staring at me from the shelf. I could not throw them away while knowing that they may hold inside my very own relatives. Maybe it was just a morbid flight of imagination. I had to know. After a sleepless night, I called a friend that worked at a radiology center. It was a strange request, yes, but she could help me. She could x-ray those dolls and find out if what was inside was a fine pottery structure or a lovingly embalmed tiny corpse. I grabbed the lot of dolls and rushed to my car. I sat them all in the back seat, and in an unthinking reflex of maternal instinct, put seatbelts on them. I jumped into the driver's seat and turned on the engine. I was backing down the street when I heard the tiny voice coming from under the ceramic shells.
Mommy? Can we finally speak now?